So, is the Appalachian experience limited to spoken word or poetry, or?
I would say no. I think about the group of people who started our organization 20 years ago. It now includes filmmakers and photographers and rappers, professors, poets, fiction writers. So I think, you know, in a larger sense, we're talking about just being artists and being creative artists, artist activists who are trying to celebrate the fact that we are from the region and we have history in the region, and we want to help people force a redefinition of the region and counter those negative, narrow stereotypes that not only exist in a pervasive way, but they erase us and make us invisible because they don't leave room for us to participate.
And you said you wanted to redefine the region. What is your definition of the region?
I would say the region is much more diverse than the stereotypes represented. You know, I think that it's an absolute bald-faced lie to say that Appalachia is 100% white. But a lot of people believe that because of the mass media images that exist. I would say that Dukes of Hazzard, Beverly Hillbillies, Next of Kin, and Deliverance does not represent the region authentically. That there are some images there that could be forced into representing part of the region, but they're false and they're hollow, and in a lot of cases created by outsiders. And I think that when you get something much more authentic that treats the region in a more humane way, that represents the true diversity and inclusive attitudes that exist here, and the true breadth of the region that includes Pittsburgh and Birmingham, that you have to see it in a different way.
Now, you've been quoted as saying, "I believe it is my responsibility to say as loudly and as often as possible that people and artists of color are part of the past and present of the multi-state Appalachian region extending from the northern Mississippi to the southern New York." Do you still feel this is so?
Absolutely. I think we say it even louder and prouder than before. Before, I thought it was just me screaming at the top of my lungs saying, you know, that definition is wrong, you know, take another look. But now when I leave my classrooms every day, I know that there are at least 20 other people, young people, who have this new information, and they're armed with this truth. And they get it, and they're sharing it with their students. Some of them may even be teachers one day. So I know that the idea is forever changed.
Well, you were obviously the founder and editor of Pluck, the Journal of Appalachian Arts and Culture. Part of the magazine's mission is to making the invisible visible. How do we reach that goal?
Well, I think we're doing it right now. I think that, you know, the fact that I'm here in this region, and if anybody thought that all the poets in the region were white, look at the camera. Here's one that isn't. And that's how we do it. You know, but we can't stop there. We have to embrace the, you know, Latinos, Asian Americans. You know, I met a woman who describes herself as being Cubalachan. There's a gentleman who I met who we did an article about in Pluck, who's an Arab Appalachian. You know, his parents were born outside the United States, but he was born in Virginia, in West Virginia, and he describes himself as, you know, as a late bloomer, acknowledging his Appalachianness, but he, having been born in the region and moved out of it after education, then coming back, you know, 20 years later, he figured out that that was his culture, that was who he was. He just had a different ethnic origin, but he was definitely Appalachian. He was trying to find a place that, a definition that allowed him to claim the region. And I think that was the problem in the beginning, that the original definition, which was you had to be a white member of the Appalachians to be Appalachian, you know, that definition was false and hollow and not inclusive. So, you know, our presidents had exploded that original definition and it forced people to look at it in a different way.
Well, going back to, you know, your history, I mean, obviously you're a recognized poet. Do you write anything else other than poetry? Any, you know, prose?
Yeah, I'm trained as a fiction writer. You know, I always think of myself as a failed novelist because I don't have a novel out yet. But I've produced 7 books of poetry. I spent 10 years as a playwright. I have some, you know, rough screenplays. You know, I've written for newspapers and magazines. You know, I think that, so I'm comfortable with the label writer/artist and not just poet, because poet is kind of pigeonholes me in that smaller space that doesn't allow room to do the other things.
And when you're, you know, writing and you're in the mode of this poetry, how does that make you feel?
You know, I never think about it. You know, I think that I know I feel nervous before I share it with somebody in public I know I feel appreciated when people respond to it or recognize their own connection to the work. But I think when I'm creating the work, it's just like breathing to me. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. I've accepted that responsibility.
So, you said at University of Kentucky, you guys would meet in that elevator and they gave you a plaque. Is there something you do to write every time? Do you go into a dark room, you have your own space, or does it just kind of hit you?
Well, I'd like to say I had an elevator at home, but I don't. And I travel so much that for me, it's not about the physical space that I need to write in. It's about the time of day. For me, it's between 4:30 and 8 o'clock in the morning is when I'm most creative. And it's about the format. I don't go to the computer to write for the first time. I still think about it in my head and compose it internally, and then I still write longhand in the journal. And at some point, if it passes the first 1 or 2 editions inside the journal, I may move it as a new poem onto a computer screen just so I can see what it's going to be shaped like. I don't worry about the form until, step 5 or 6 of the revision process.
Well, I mean, that's obviously the mechanics of the poem. And we've talked about, the new generation, how you feel your influence in them. What is your biggest fear for the current generation of the Appalachian region?
My biggest fear is that people will stop reading books, that the new technology will convince people that books are not important, and that somehow the importance of that and the smell of a book will be something that people don't recognize. And that scares me a little bit, but that says something about my generation, because I know that my son, who's 19, he'd be perfectly happy with having all of his textbooks on his iPad. He'd be totally okay with that. I really like the idea of taking a backpack with me when I travel with books in it instead of one little notebook and reading electronic. I want to turn that page. I want to feel that paper. There's something cathartic about that process for me that is just part of who I am. I'm not ready to let that go.
In turn, what is your biggest fear for the next generation?
That they won't want to write, that they won't value literature, that they'll buy into mass media's definition of who they are, that they won't fight to tell their own story. I think those are legitimate fears, and I think that's where artists, activists, and committed teachers come in to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, your work has been described as in the tradition of Du Bois, McKay, Robeson, and Hughes. How would you compare or contrast your work to these artists?
I think that's a very flattering comparison. I don't know that I've earned it yet. I'd like to say that was true by the time I take my last breath. But I'm more comfortable saying I'd like to aspire to that level, and it keeps my nose to the grindstone, keeps me working hard at trying to be a better writer and a better teacher.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Walker. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up Direction Northeast.
Northeast State's a wonderful place to start your career in college, and the campus is beautiful. The teachers are one-on-one.
It was an excellent decision to come to Northeast State. I've learned so much coming here.
I love the school, and everyone is friendly here. This has been the best time of my life. I have really enjoyed being here.
I think if it hadn't have been for Northeast, then I wouldn't feel as happy and as driven if I chose another school.
Step by step, Northeast State is here to get you there. Enroll now at northeaststate.edu.
That concludes the program for today. We met Mr. Frank X. Walker, co-founder of the Affrilachian Poets and the creator of the word Affrilacha. Community is very important to the students at Northeast State Community College, and this program takes a look at a few of the subjects they find important. Until we meet next time, on behalf of the students, staff, and faculty of Northeast State Community College, I'm Chris Mitchell, and this is Direction Northeast.